Saga of a New World, Book 1, Dawn of the New World. Chapter 6. The Early Bird Gets the Worm. Astrid feels herself waking up. She's always been a long sleeper, and as she opens her eyes, she expects the sun to shine, just as it always did in her room. To her surprise, she is hit by a wall of darkness. Her vision is a solid mass of black and a bit of red. Slowly, the red highlights begin to fade in some areas while intensifying in others. 4 red shapes mark the presence of 4 other people in the room with her, and they are all still asleep. Astrid is surprised. Whenever they could sleep in on weekends, she would always be the last to wake up. By the time she managed to drag herself downstairs, her brother was usually coming back from his morning jog. Since everyone else is asleep, Astrid just tries to close her eyes again. When she woke up early as a human, usually from her phone's alarm clock, she would have difficulty not falling asleep again. Now, it's the exact opposite. Her body refuses to relax. The more she tries to stay still, the more a weird tingling spreads through her body, urging her to move. Her brain is no better. Even though she tries to clear her mind and relax, all her brain wants to do is focus. She fights against herself with a variety of techniques, but the weird need to do something only intensifies the more she tries to resist it. Finally, she gives up. The red highlights in her vision give her a general idea of where everything is, allowing her to navigate the dark with little difficulty. She tries to look outside through the living room windows, but sees that her red sight doesn't penetrate through the glass. Instead, it looks like a mirror that only reflects the red part of her vision, and to the rest, it's just a near-solid wall of black. She sits up and removes her blanket as quietly as she can. Waking up in normal clothes instead of pajamas feels weird, and she doesn't even want to know what she smells like. Then again, she has bigger problems than worrying about her probably suboptimal hygiene, like finding out how she's going to acquire a breakfast. God, I could really use some bacon and pancakes right now. She shakes her breakfast fantasy out of her head as fast as possible, but the damage is already done. Her stomach immediately makes it known that he would indeed like to be filled with bacon and pancakes, and sooner rather than later. To make sure she knows he's serious, he grumbles and cramps up. Astrid clenches her teeth and waits for the burning to pass before she takes another look around the room. Reaching the door to the garden would require stepping over several people, which leaves the front door as the only way out. She finds it locked, but the keys are in the hole. A slow turn unlocks the door with nothing but a quiet clack. Before Astrid leaves, she makes sure to flick a small lever in the door frame. It will prevent the lock from snapping shut. Then she closes the door as quietly as she can. She didn't notice just how thick the air inside the house is until she steps outside. A cool wind washes over her as she takes a deep breath of fresh air. For a few seconds, Astrid just stands there, breathing and listening. The darkness surrounding her seems almost unnatural. Her red sight, while very useful in the dark, seems to have a very limited range where it is accurate enough to let her see her surroundings. She didn't really pay attention to it yesterday, but everything more than 4 or 5 paces away gets lost in darkness. The street lamps that would normally keep the night at bay are black. Even the moon is hiding behind clouds. She listens until she hears footsteps. A red shape comes into view across the street. Before she can say anything, Astrid is bathed in light. Her eyes burn from the sudden brightness, and she is forced to look away. "What are you doing out here?" the sheriff asks as she lowers both her flashlight and her gun. Unlike yesterday, she's now dressed in a full police uniform. It seems to fit her surprisingly well, considering her new body, and as far as Astrid can tell, everything, except for the sheriff's jeans, is part of the original uniform. Couldn't sleep anymore, the sheriff asks. A nightmare? Astrid shakes her head. No, I just feel restless and awake. It seems to be an elf thing. Come, the sheriff waves for her to follow. Do you have that reddish night vision too? Mm-hmm, Astrid nods. The sheriff turns off the flashlight, plunging everything back into darkness. With the light gone, all color and features on the sheriff's body disappear, and she becomes little more than a red shape. She leads Astrid across the street and into the backyard of her house. There's another person sitting at a small table. A candle in front of him casts a mixture of normal and red light around itself. It's barely enough to illuminate the table, but the person itself remains shrouded in darkness. The shape looks up as they approach. So that was what you heard. I guess we'll have to find something other than chess now. Don't let me stop you two, Astrid says as she sits down next to the man. The sheriff drops into the chair opposite him. Nah, it's fine. Let's see. We can't play cards in the dark. Ludo, maybe? The others just shrug, so she grabs the box containing the board game and sets it on the table. Smoke, the sheriff says, and offers Astrid a pack of cigarettes. Astrid shakes her head and rolls her dice. The sheriff shrugs and stows the cigarettes in her pocket. You know what? I probably shouldn't ruin my new lungs either. So what's the plan for tomorrow? Astrid asks once she's made her move. The sheriff grabs the dice and throws it next. We need to find other people and figure out what the hell is going on. I'll set up a group of volunteers and then we'll head to High Rock as soon as the sun rises. Speaking of which, is either one of you interested in being part of said group of volunteers? The male elf bites his lip. I would, but I can't leave my family alone. If the house is attacked by one of those monsters while we're gone... The sheriff scoffs. Come on. We have 12 armed hunters guarding these two houses. 11 won't make a difference. Besides, it's just a short trip. We'll be back before nightfall. The man pauses. Astrid watches him, but the red glow doesn't reveal his expression. Fine. I'll come with you. Excellent. The sheriff pauses for a moment, then nods at Astrid. What about you? Astrid hesitates a moment. She's not too keen on getting eaten alive by whatever's stalking the road out there. On the other hand, she and her new body are probably best suited for surviving, and if they find any supplies, the volunteers will probably get to have an early bite. With that thought, she says, I guess, but wouldn't the armed hunters be a bit better qualified? They would be, but an extra pair of eyes can't hurt, and you don't seem like the blind or stupid kind. What was your name again? Astrid smiles as she throws her dice. Astrid? Nice to meet you, Astrid. You know what? Just call me Sheriff Winkler, or just Sheriff for short. Astrid leans towards the sheriff like she's about to tell her a secret. Say, you wouldn't have something to eat, would you? The sheriff shakes her head. We never expected this many people to come here. You know what? We'll need our energy tomorrow. Food's only for people who do stuff. Let's go raid the kitchen. The sheriff stands up. Now that is a good idea if I've ever heard one, the male elf says as he jumps out of his chair. The three elves creep through the quiet house and enter the kitchen. The sheriff goes straight for the fridge. Astrid, grab the bread over there. We'll eat outside. Astrid quietly grabs the baguette while the sheriff and the male elf gather sausage and spread. The sheriff whispers, Here, we have some lasagna from yesterday. The sheriff trails off as she sees someone standing in the doorway. The kitchen is suddenly illuminated by a flashlight. Astrid is forced to shield her eyes from the sudden light. A female voice asks, What the hell are you doing? It's the sheriff's wife. Getting an early breakfast, the sheriff whispers back. You know we don't have much to eat, and you're plundering what's left before anyone else is even awake?" In the light of the flashlight, Astrid can see the sheriff glare at her wife. Her voice sounds angry. "I am hungry. This is my house, and if I feel like I'm starving, I will eat. You know, you could also take a second to think about everyone else. Other people will be hungry tomorrow too." The sheriff's voice rapidly rises in volume. "Other people are not opening their house to others. Other people are not going to go on a hike through a monster-infested forest tomorrow." Just then, another red shape appears in the doorway. "What's going on?" Astrid hears Noah whisper. "Nothing. Let's go outside." "Noah, you want something to eat?" the sheriff asks. "I'm tired, so I'm going to go back to bed now. It would be great if you could all be a little quieter." Before the sheriff walks out of the kitchen, she also grabs several bottles from the fridge. "I also feel like having a beer," she pushes past her wife. Astrid and the male elf quietly follow. "You want one too?" The sheriff offers Astrid one of the bottles. As she hesitates, the sheriff adds, "It's got a lot of calories, helps squash the hunger." Upon hearing that, Astrid shrugs and grabs the bottle. By the time the sun rises, the three elves have consumed everything they took. Even after the bread ran out, they just ate the spreads as they were. Then the sheriff threw everything out, even the bottles. By the time everyone else wakes up, there is little evidence of what they did in the early morning hours. Even though it was quite a massive early breakfast, Astrid still feels hungry. If she could, she would eat another baguette, but after a few minutes the hunger subsides. She still has an appetite, but at least the burning is gone. To her surprise, Astrid notices that she's not tired at all. Even though she woke up hours before sunrise, she feels completely awake, almost like she downed several cans of energy drink. Everyone gathers in the street between the two houses. It takes a while for everyone to come outside, but once everyone is present, the sheriff starts her announcement. "Good morning, everyone. Today, a team is going to head for the nearest town to get supplies and get filled in on how our mayor, or other authority, plans on dealing with the situation at hand. From what we heard, the event that occurred yesterday created many extremely dangerous creatures. Going alone would be foolish, so I'm going to need a team of volunteers. This is obviously going to be dangerous, but it needs to be done. Who would be willing to accompany me on this mission?" Just like she promised, Astrid immediately steps forward and raises her hand. The male elf quickly follows. The sheriff takes a quick look at them both. She smiles as she waves them over. The former sheriff scans the group and asks, "Who else?" A few more hands slowly rise, and two more people step forward. Lucas and Finn. Before he joins the group, Lucas quickly kisses his wife goodbye. Astrid notices that his rifle is still slung over his shoulder and immediately feels better about the trip they are about to embark on. Finn has slung his rifle over his back too, and finally got rid of his brown warning vest. Astrid isn't sure why he would wear something like that over his good dark green clothes, and is glad he took it off. Now he looks a lot less like a forest clown and more like someone who could shoot a monster before it can jump on top of Astrid and stab her with its claws. She quickly shakes that weird and sudden fantasy out of her head as Finn joins the group of volunteers. The sheriff looks over the crowd once more. When it's obvious that no one else is going to raise their hands, she leads the group into her house. While they follow the sheriff to the living room, Astrid decides to ask Finn something. "Why were you wearing that weird brown vest yesterday?" Finn looks puzzled. "What brown vest?" "You know, the one you were wearing yesterday when we talked." "I was wearing this and my orange warning vest, but I wasn't wearing anything brown," Finn says. Astrid shrugs, but doesn't have time to ask anything else before the sheriff leads them into her living room. Unlike yesterday evening, it's now empty and flooded with sunlight. The elf sits down on the couch and waits for the group to enter the room. All right, thank you all for volunteering. I can see that those who aren't cops are hunters, so we're all armed with weapons designed to kill things as quickly as possible. Noah already told me about a creature that was apparently resistant to smaller calibers. Lucas also told me that he managed to repel one of these things with his rifle. I can't tell how effective our guns will be against monsters, but unless they're magical, bullets ought to do the job, and from what I can tell, all these new creatures are still just animals. She looks them all over and notices that Astrid isn't armed. You don't have a weapon. Have you ever used a gun before? I shot my brother's airsoft pistol a few times. Uh-huh. The elf looks unimpressed. Well, at least you're brave. This little group is small enough as it is, and surprisingly few of these. She stops herself from saying something extremely rude, then continues, these heavily armed men are willing to take a 1-hour walk through the forest that they normally hunt in, just because the wildlife has apparently become a bit more feisty than usual. Does any one of you have a sidearm he could give this woman? Sheriff, isn't that illegal? Noah asks his superior. She scowls at him. Protocol kicked the bucket when that weird fog enveloped the world. Besides, as I said, few enough people volunteered anyway. Now can one of you spare a sidearm? Finn shifts uncomfortably, then takes off the holster holding a silver revolver at his side. You're lucky I even brought this today. Please be gentle with it, I want it back. Finn slowly places the weapon in Astrid's hands. She stares at the revolver. It feels surprisingly heavy. Holding such a deadly instrument causes her heart to race. Even her hands quiver a bit as she secures the holster around her waist. They all watch her as she pulls the revolver out and raises it. Careful, the sheriff says, causing Astrid to jump and close both hands around the weapon to stop it from falling. That thing is a deadly weapon, so never point it at anything you're not absolutely sure you want to kill. She nods. The gun seems to be getting heavier and hotter as she pulls it out and holds it. The fact that it now only takes her a single thought and a small movement to send a deadly piece of lead flying through the room makes her feel strong, as though she can now take on anything the world throws at her. At the same time, a massive weight constricts her chest. The tool of death in her hands leaves no room for mistakes. She almost feels like handing it right back, but a little uneasiness is a small price to pay in exchange for being able to defend herself. Holding the gun feels like holding incredible power in her hands and an almost crushing responsibility on her shoulders. The sheriff sees Astrid stare at the weapon and says to Finn, "Explain to her how to use that thing so she doesn't shoot her own foot off." Those words don't make Astrid feel any better. Alright, Finn takes the revolver out of her hands. That thing is loaded with 638 rounds. The trigger is pretty hard to pull unless you manually cock the hammer. Then it's much easier than you think, so be careful. It's a pretty weak caliber, so the recoil is pretty smooth. You hold and shoot it like this. He grabs the gun with both hands and holds it with his arms angled. It doesn't have a safety, so if you need to make it safe after cocking the hammer, you do it like this. He quickly cocks the hammer, holds it in place with his thumb, touches the trigger, and slowly guides the hammer forward. Make sure you let go of the trigger, or it might go off when you let the hammer move forward. Needless to say, don't shoot yourself or us. You got that? Astrid nods, and he hands her the weapon again. She stares at the silver metal a little longer, then tears her gaze away from it. While she slowly places the gun back in its holster, the others continue the discussion. Now, about the task itself, the sheriff continues her briefing. As I already said, High Rock is about an hour walking distance away from us. She pulls out a map of the area. The path they have to take is marked with a yellow highlighter. It leads through a patch of forest and then over a road snaking through open fields until finally reaching the town. Seems pretty straightforward. Lucas notices as he peers over the map. "We desperately need supplies and to know what's going on, so we'll be back before sundown. If we're not..." The sheriff trails off. The others don't need her to finish to know what she would have said. Everyone will assume we're dead and try to figure out something else. The sheriff pauses for a moment, then pulls herself off the couch and says, "Now, let's not waste any more time." She leads them back out of the house. As they leave, the weight of the gun at Astrid's side reminds her of its presence with every step. The sheriff apparently really means that she doesn't want to waste any more time. They immediately depart, and she doesn't even say goodbye to her wife. As they leave, they can see other people looking out of the windows, some waving them goodbye, a few holding their rifles and scanning the tree line ahead for anything dangerous. The late summer sun shines from the sky and birds chirp all around them. Even as they enter the forest, the sun's rays shine through between the trees. The path marked on their map turns out to be a gravel road that makes its way through the forest. It's a beautiful day. Still, the trees and dense undergrowth make it difficult to see into the woods beyond. The fear of what might be waiting for them just out of sight prevents the group from enjoying the perfect weather. Like a gunslinger, the sheriff has her hand on her holster. Lucas has his rifle in his hands. It's heavy, but carrying it on his back might mean he wouldn't be able to pull it out fast enough if something decides to attack them. The others follow their lead, their weapons ready and their eyes peeled. Lucas's voice suddenly breaks the quiet, causing everyone to jump. Is it just me, or is the forest denser than yesterday? The sheriff glares at him. "Quiet, and keep your ears peeled. We don't need to alert the entire forest to our presence." Unlike the people traveling through it, the forest seems to be as peaceful as can be. The difference between these woods and the forest of last week is subtle, but anyone who knows nature would spot the changes immediately. One of the more obvious new additions to the forest flora are the fern-like bushes growing on the forest floor. Next to the street stands a small bush that looks a bit like a hemp plant. Its stem and leaves glisten from a dark yellow oil that covers them. Most of the trees look just like what a normal tree is supposed to look like, but closer inspection of their leaves and bark would reveal some of them to be something that didn't grow here last week. The most obvious new plant, though, is a bamboo-like tree with round leaves growing out of the stem and a cluster of them at the top, facing upwards as though the plant uses them to reach for the sky. Wherever the larger trees leave space, these things stand like pillars to reach for the sun above. These newcomers struggle against the plants that have called these woods their home for ages, and soon nature will decide what will be left standing and what is unfit to survive this new world. It takes the group a while to reach the edge of the forest, but as they do, a weight seems to drop off all their shoulders. While nothing happened, the tension was unbearable. In front of them, fields stretch into the distance, eventually ending in another forest and a cloud of fog. What were endless fields of almost ripe corn yesterday are now spotted with several other plants. Ferns, flowers with palm tree-like stalks, and many more dot the fields, while beautiful yellow, pink, and blue flowers, weeds, and many other new plants stand between normal ones. A whistle escapes Lucas' lips. Wow. There might be horrible monsters everywhere, but at least the plants are pretty. While there might be monsters prowling around, and Astrid doesn't know where her family is, the natural beauty infuses her with some sort of deep joy. It really is. A road splits the fields and leads to two farms, one a bit closer and the other a good deal further away. The one closest to them consists of one huge building. At least it used to, because the building now lies in ruins. The entire left section and roof have collapsed inward. Soot and small plumes of smoke rising from the wreckage indicate that a recent fire caused the destruction. Around the ruin, cows and creatures that look a bit like brown bison graze on the fields. Finn slings his rifle over his shoulder. "Look, that's my family's farm over there." He points past the burned down wreckage at the still intact group of buildings. Noah checks the map and says, "Looks like we have no more forest ahead of us. You guys think we should check that farm over there for any living people before we head to Finn's farm?" The others consider his question for a moment. Then the sheriff says, "I don't know." "You know what? Why not? As long as we make it quick." They leave the trees behind and follow the now properly asphalted road out to the open. They head for the large building, still checking the fields and forest's edge for anything that might be dangerous. Thank you for listening to this Ember and Sparks production. Click the box on the left to listen to the next chapter or the box on the right to see an overview of all chapters available for this story. Check out the links in the description to listen to this audiobook without interruption. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss a new story. See you soon.